So recently, we've talked about kind of automation and how Rubrik can allow for simplification of some of your administrative tasks. What I want to do today is talk about how we can extend that to other members of your team and really drive down the day two operations and the increase the visibility of backups within your environment so that your other operations teams, application owner, database owners can really be a lot more self-sufficient. So today I'm going to focus on something simple, SQL databases. you know, the operational simplicity of the API calls and the automation rules that we can feature with also our LiveMount capabilities can really do things like driving the RTO, the recovery time objective, almost to zero. So what I want to show you here is I have some databases. Specifically, this food price database is the one I'm going to work with. So what I've done here recently is create a little scripted out environment where I'm going to run some commands, do something I don't want done to my data, and then how do I recover from that, right? So one of the first things I want to look at is if we go ahead and we look at what our table is, what our database has in it. I have a database table, small little file. It's got 20 lines in it. Good for what I need it to do. But what if I do something that is not meant? I go ahead and I make a change that commits an error to my database, right? I've now affected my database in a way that I don't want to. In this case, I just deleted about half the data. Now, once the commit's done, typically you'd have to maybe engage your operations team or some other support people, and they would have to maybe restore the database to get it to a place that you can do an export, import, or kind of take the data back out and get it in production. And there's multiple phases, multiple people that you have to engage, and a lot of really steps involved in the process. So what I'm going to do here is show you a way, first going back into our automation process, right? This is our UI. Our UI is 100% API first. So everything that we do within our environment is an API called Rubrik. So you can see here, I'm on my appliance. From that appliance, we can also showcase out and publish out the documentation for our API calls. We do have an API Explorer that you can go ahead and look at and see the different configuration options available to you within our product set. And then we also have some kind of available SDKs and tooling integrations. So depending on what level of automation and scripting you already have, you can actually just download items from our repositories and then edit them for your environment. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kick off a script where I'm going to go ahead and do a live mount of a database and then present that back to my SQL environment so I can recover the data. So here I've created a pretty simple little script that's going to go ahead and connect to my server instance, connect to my cluster, and restore data to the point. So I'm going to go ahead and run that with PowerShell. It's an 18-line code. It's pretty simple. I'm going to choose the most recent backup of my data because that's what I want the data from, but you can obviously script it to a specific point in time. If you have something that happens like over the weekend and it's on Monday and you're trying to recover from the event. Now, what I'm going to do in my environment is the reason that this is really powerful is we have a couple things, role-based access being one of them. So I can give very tight controls to what a user is allowed to do within an environment based on an integration with their user account. So I'm going to go ahead and look at a user account for myself once I hit type. And what it's going to do is I'm going to be able to look at my user and say, I want this person to be able to do certain administrative tasks or restore operations, but I want to tightly define what they can do. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the authorization, and you can see from this end user that I've created, I've assigned very specific objects that person can utilize, right? They're only really functioning within the environments that they're concerned with. I can also do a lot of things to disable and enable what they can do within that environment. So I've set that user control policy up. And in this case, what we looked at earlier was about a database. So I'm going to go ahead and look at SQL Server databases. And you can see we integrate tightly with the management studio. So we do things like we are aware of availability groups. We respect the settings that you've created for those items. But I'm going to go ahead and look at a database here. Oh, all DBs. We help if I search in the right field. And this database that I looked at just a minute ago, when I click on it, you can see all the different points in time that you can go ahead and restore to. Now, what I did earlier is I kicked off a live mount of that database from the most recent point in time. What that does within my SQL environment, if I just go back up here and refresh the databases, that I live mounted that database back to my SQL instance. Now, what's really powerful in this case is if I look at the properties of my original production database that I made the change to inadvertently, right? It is a generic SQL database, right? C program files, it's what you would expect. What we're doing with LiveMount technologies, we're allowing ourselves to present a database directly from our storage on our backup appliance. So it is an immutable version of the data. It cannot be edited by the SQL administrator. And you can see here, instead of it's being presented directly from an SMB share on our appliance. This is going to allow us to then be able to have an immutable system that they cannot actually edit, but they can mount that database so that they can pull tables from it and inject it back into their production environment. So it gives them the ability to access their data, recover their data, and recover production specifically to a point in time that they want without actually putting anything at risk. So one of the really cool pieces now is I can sit here quickly and within this production database, go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to undo effectively the changes that I just made. When I go back to my production database, I've now recovered the 10 rows of data that I just had. All of that from a live mounted database directly from our storage into your SQL Server environment. When I'm done, you can obviously automate this part as well, but you can see down here, I have a listing of all the different live mounts of what's going on in my environment. When I go to the SQL Server DBs, here's my live mount food price. My production was the food price database, and either myself or a backup operator can simply unmount that database. All that's going to do is effectively take that SMB share away from the SQL Server that it was presented to, and then allow the SQL Server to then go ahead and unmount that data. So you see it would take a couple seconds. And then when I go back into my SQL environment, looks like that already got kicked out. So when I come back here, I go to my database, I do a quick refresh, the database is gone. Now as an administrator of this SQL environment, I recognize there was an issue. I was able to then go gain access to the data that would allow me to recover the data as quickly as possible, inject that data back into my production database, and then clean that back up. And it took no extra steps. I'm not talking to other teams. I'm not coordinating data transfers. I don't have to find a 500 gig area to copy a database or export it to. It's a simple process for me to mount that data directly from the storage device that is holding the backup data, pull the tables or rows out that I need, and then close that off, none of which ever puts the actual data that's in the backup environment at risk. So that's just a quick way I wanted to show you of kind of some of the things that we can do. Self-service, allow other team members, applications owners, again, the whole idea is to drive down the amount of time it takes to recover from an incident, whether that is SQL, an entire VM, or a specific file from a file share. So I hope that was interesting today. We're going to keep posting videos like this in different instances of, I'm going to call it real world examples of things that you can do with our tool set to make the day two operations kind of better for your team. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate it today.